Good afternoon to you. It is now 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news coming up today. Doug Blair joins us. He's an expert on polling. We'll talk to him about the effect RFK's announcement today will have on this race. Doug joins us this hour. Allie Bradley from News Nation. She spoke with President Trump yesterday amidst a manhunt for a would-be assassin. It was a big interview. We'll talk to her about what that was like yesterday. 4 o'clock, she joins us. And at 5 o'clock, we'll talk to Steve Baker, an investigative reporter with The Blaze, who has been jailed by the Biden administration as Kamala Harris claims that it's her political opponent who would do such things. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We are watching live right now RFK's announcement today in Arizona. He has been withdrawing from a number of battleground states. He's been withdrawing his name in court filings, election filings today from a number of battleground states, places like Arizona and Pennsylvania. Here is RFK just moments ago indicating what it sounded like to me, that he's now prepared to throw his support to Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Three great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent, and now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, the war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification, like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, invading the Ukraine, and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the U.S. neocons for American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response to the reckless neocon project of extending NATO to encircle Russia, a hostile act. The credulous media rarely explain to Americans that we unilaterally walked away from 2 intermediate nuclear weapons treaties with Russia and then put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. This is a hostile act. And that the Biden White House repeatedly spurned Russia's offer to settle this war peacefully. The Ukraine war began in 2014 when U.S. agencies overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed a hand-picked pro-Western government that launched a deadly civil war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. In 2019, America walked away from a peace treaty, the Minsk Agreement, that had been negotiated between Russia and Ukraine by European nations. And then in April of 2022, we wanted the war. In April of 2022, President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to force President Zelensky to tear up a peace agreement that he and the Russians had already signed, and the Russians were withdrawing troops from Kiev and Donbass and Lugansk. And that peace agreement would have brought peace to the region and would have allowed Donbass and Lugansk to remain part of Ukraine.
All right, let me, so he's giving an extended explanation for here why he's deciding to throw his support behind Trump. And among the issues that he says that he cares about over the course of this press conference, which, by the way, I should point out to you, of the 3 major cable news networks today, the only one that's been carrying it live has been Fox News. MSNBC and CNN are refusing to cover this speech live. They have, I think, at times put the image on screen, but they've been talking over him for what and not allowing his voice to be heard by the American public to hear why he is deciding to drop out of this race, why he is throwing his support behind Trump. He said in his remarks today that he had made a decision some time ago that he would not continue this campaign if he was merely going to play spoiler, if he didn't have a meaningful path to victory here. And it is crystal clear that he sees the biggest threat to this country, continued Democrat control of the system. And he points to a number of things, including these interests here. He's very concerned about censorship, which, of course, he has been subjected to, very much like President Trump in a lot of ways. In fact, perhaps even worse in RFK's case. Ukraine, one of the major issues he cares about, trying to break the spell that Washington has on that subject, which is it's never heading towards peace. And if you ask about it, you're told to shut up. And then he's very concerned also about health, the role of the pharmaceutical industry, what's going on with the American food supply. All deeply reasonable issues that, of course, by and large, Washington doesn't concentrate on. So here's RFK today saying he wants to throw his support behind Trump in this election. Now, one thing of note, he announced today that he is working to have his name removed in the battleground states. That his name is not, his goal is to remove the name off of the ballot in the battleground states so that nobody gets confused or tries to vote for him. He's not in the game in those states. But he did say in blue states, should there be people who want to vote for him, he encouraged them, do it. Do it. Clearly to send a message in those states where you expect Democrats to win anyway. He's saying, you know, even if Kamala Harris is going to win those electoral votes, or whoever the nominee is come election day, he says, go ahead, vote for me. I'm continuing to ask for your vote in those states. But in the battleground states, not so. He says here that he's throwing his support behind President Trump. And clearly he has a lot of beef with these Democrats. He vocalized, something about this Democrat convention that's gone all week today. He said, they keep on using this word democracy, but he said what they're really doing is dismantling our democratic institutions.
But I'm sorry to say that while democracy may still be alive at the grassroots, it has become little more than a slogan for our political institutions, for our media, and for our government, and most sadly at all for me, for the Democratic Party. In the name of saving democracy, the Democratic Party set itself to dismantling it, lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth. The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself. Each time that our volunteers turned in those towering boxes of signatures needed to get on the ballot, the DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters who had signed those petitions. It deployed DNC-aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot and to throw President Trump in jail.
Yeah, so again, over and over and over again, he's pointing out here that this is not a party that believes in or upholds or is defending so-called democracy, our constitutional republic, more specifically, but instead is setting about dismantling it, that any opposition that gets in its way, contrary to what Michelle Obama claimed earlier this week. Remember in her speech, she said, we're a party that doesn't just change the rules. You're literally the party that attempts to change the rules in order to win in perpetuity. Literally the party. And RFK condemning that, and rightfully so today. Now, additionally, he talked quite a bit about the media in his remarks today, where he said that this media is dedicated to only advancing the cause of these Democrats, and in fact, manufacturing popularity for Kamala Harris, who in real life lacks it.
Instead of showing us her substance and character, the DNC and its media organs engineered a surge of popularity for Vice President Harris based upon, well, nothing. No policies, no interviews, no debates, only smoke and mirrors and balloons in a highly produced Chicago circus. Yeah. There in Chicago, a string of Democratic speakers mentioned Donald Trump 147 times just on the first day. Who needs a policy when you have Trump to hate? In contrast, at the RNC convention, President Biden was mentioned only twice in 4 days.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And remember, in President Trump's speech, he went out of his way not to even mention Joe Biden. This was not a Biden-concentrated speech that President Trump gave. It was a forward-looking, hopeful speech about the country. Contrast that with what we heard from Kamala Harris last night, to the extent that any of you may have listened to it. If you didn't, you didn't miss much other than constant barrage of attacks on Donald Trump, lies, deceit, projection coming out of the mouth of Kamala Harris, written by someone on her campaign. The speech was basically forgettable. Let's be honest. It was, despite the fact that the media was crowing that you'll remember where you were when you heard it, which made me laugh out loud. It's preposterous. They're over the top. But that's what RFK is saying. That's literally what he's saying now. He's like, it's the media who's propping up this very empty candidate with things like this.
All right, you will remember where you were when you heard this speech tonight from the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, really introducing herself to the nation, speaking as much to Republicans and independents as she was to the Democrats who were nominating her tonight, asking Americans to remember how great their country is and to fight for its values. You're going to remember where you were on this night. This is an inflection point in history.
Yeah, the party of locking up its political opponents and preventing them from appearing on ballots was reminding us of our values. Over on CNN, Jake Tapper sounded like this.
In a speech in which she sought to portray herself as a credible commander-in-chief, patriotic, firm, confident, and credible. She discussed Israel and Palestine. She discussed
incredible. Credible means that you can believe what she said, that she was honest, that she had integrity. It was credible. No, it was not. Kamala Harris reeled off a series of lies, exaggerations, projections, and said that her political opponents were the tyrants, that they were the ones who would lock reporters up. In fact, it's the Biden administration who's done that very thing. And people like Jake Tapper who refuse to cover it, refuse to stand up for their fellow journalists. In fact, we have one of them joining us today. Steve Baker will be here at 5 o'clock, a man who was jailed by the Biden administration for committing acts of journalism. And so good for RFK today. Good for RFK Jr. coming out and saying, look, I wanted to do something different. I don't agree with these other two parties on everything. But boy, the left constitutes, the Democrats constitute an immense threat to the well-being of the constitutional republic. They're undermining it every turn. The censorship, the subversion of our democratic institutions, the installing of a Democrat Party nominee at the last second, no interviews with her whatsoever. She hasn't been subjected to it. She has an adoring media that's running cover for her. We're being fed a constant stream of lies. And so what this has done is, and of course, because he's been on the receiving end of it, he knows what this is like. What this is doing is it's developing, in some sense, the most unique political coalition that any of us have ever seen. People who do not like the establishment, people who are ready to fight back against it. And if he has any impact whatsoever on the race away from these Democrats, it's going to be a big deal. We'll talk to Doug Blair about that coming up in just minutes. He's got an assessment of the polling here, what all of this could mean, and really hoping it means good things for the country. So we'll keep talking about that. And we'll take your calls, 888-630-9625. It is now 3:21. Okay, we take you from Arizona, where RFK just made the announcement that he is suspending his presidential campaign. It's always legalese. They don't exactly end the campaign. They suspend it. But he's removing his name from the ballot in all of the battleground states, and he's throwing his support now behind Donald Trump there. President Trump, meanwhile, is in Las Vegas, Nevada, and just began his remarks at an event there. And he begins by acknowledging the endorsement that he just received.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for being here. We just had a very nice endorsement from RFK Jr., Bobby. And I'll be talking about that. We're heading out right after this. We're going to be going to Arizona. We'll be talking about that and a lot of other things, too. But I just want to thank everybody. And I want to thank Bobby. That was very nice. That was really very nice. That's big. He's a great guy, respected by everybody. So thank you all for this incredible welcome we're getting. And I'm going to tell Javier the next time we do this together, he's going to give me a little light up here. You know, can you give me a little light so you can read this little speech? But you know what it does? It makes you speak a little bit less, so that's okay too.
All right, so there's President Trump getting started on another event there in Nevada, but saying that he's very grateful for RFK Jr.'s endorsement. Now, we still await the details of whether or not these two men are going to appear together. Now, RFK may have said that in the intervening time. I'm not certain. So we'll keep our eyes open for that. But there is another event today in Arizona. President Trump is headed to Arizona this afternoon. He's participating in a Turning Point event there. And the news releases yesterday indicated that he would be bringing a, quote, special guest with him. Now, one would assume this is a real special guest, not a Democrat convention special guest, right? Where they tell us that, oh, somebody very special is going to appear, and then nobody actually appears. It's the same old boring tyrants, one after the other. No special guests yesterday. Apparently, President Trump will have a special guest with him at this Turning Point event. Could that be RFK? Could that be RFK Jr. appearing with him? One would assume that that's the special guest, but we will see. So that's the news today. RFK suspending his campaign. He's asking blue state voters to vote for him still. Don't give those votes to Kamala. Give them to RFK if you're going to give them to anybody, he says. But meanwhile, in the battleground states, removing his name from the ballot and throwing his support behind Donald Trump. Will it change the race in meaningful ways? We'll ask Doug Blair. He's an expert on the polls. We'll chat with him next here on the Vince Coglianese Show. Good afternoon to you. It is 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Allie Bradley from News Nation will join us at the top of the hour. She had a brief but a very important interview with President Trump yesterday. We'll discuss that with her. And Steve Baker is here at 5 o'clock from The Blaze, the journalist who was arrested by the Biden administration. We'll discuss that with him and what he thought, as Kamala Harris claimed it was Donald Trump who was in the mood for arresting journalists. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We're hearing a lot today from RFK Jr., who's suspending his campaign, throwing his support behind Donald Trump. Here he is going after the media today.
But here in America, the DNC also prevented opponents from appearing on the ballot. And our television networks exposed themselves as Democratic Party organs over the course of more than a year in a campaign where my poll numbers reached at times in the high 20s. The DNC-aligned mainstream media networks maintain a near perfect embargo on interviews with me. During his 10-month presidential campaign in 1992, Ross Perot gave 34 interviews on mainstream networks. In contrast, during the 16 months since I declared, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN combined gave only 2 live interviews from me. Those networks instead ran a continuous deluge of hit pieces with inaccurate, often vile, pejoratives and defamatory smears. Some of those same networks and colluded with the DNC to keep me off the debate stage. Representatives of those networks are in this room right now, and I'll just take a moment to ask you to consider the many ways that your institutions have abdicated this really sacred responsibility, the duty of a free press to safeguard democracy and to challenge always the party in power. Instead of maintaining that posture of fear or skepticism toward authority, your institutions have made themselves government mouthpieces and stenographers for the organs of power. You didn't alone cause the devolution of American democracy, but you could have prevented it. The Democratic Party's censorship of social media was even more of a naked exercise of executive power.
An eloquent takedown of the forces in our country that are supposed to be using that First Amendment right to uplift the public consciousness, and instead they have been suppressing it. Just awful. Here with reaction to this news today, just breaking this hour, Doug Blair joins us now. He's the author of the Blair Broadcast Substack, and he's a polling analyst as well. I want to talk about the impact on this race that this decision has. Doug, good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be here, Vince. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Doug, what do you make of RFK's announcement and just his scathing assessment of the Democrat Party in the press?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct to note that his campaign, which has been one of the most successful third-party campaigns we've seen since he mentioned Ross Perot, the fact that they basically treated him as a joke candidate, I think, is just a more obvious piece of evidence that the media is in the tank for the Democrats. I mean, if we look at some of the polling data that we've had recently, even before he announced he was going to drop out, in places like Utah, which is very strongly, obviously, a Trump state. It's a very red state. He was still polling at almost 20%. He was about 18% before he decided to make the move to drop out. So this is not some fringe Cornel West, Jill Stein type candidate. This was a very serious contender that was sapping votes from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I think the mainstream media, though, recognized that he was dangerous and they wanted to tamp down on him as much as possible.
Yeah, and he's a perfect case study and actually kind of a useful one because he's not traditionally a part of certainly the Republican Party. That's not the way you would think of him. So he's kind of on the outside of that. And you can look at him with objective eyes. And what you're seeing is that the media, as he points out, didn't allow his voice to even be heard on their networks throughout his campaign. And then when he was discussed, he was slandered. They would refer to him as things like anti-vax, which is not even true. If anything, he's vaccine cautious. And yet they would construe him in dishonest ways in order to kick him out of the debate entirely and to say that you shouldn't take him seriously.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the same type of behavior that they would use with a lot of Republican candidates, which is why they saw him as opposition, right? You could see the playbook that they use with Republicans very much at play here. He's anti-science. He's anti-vaccine. He hates all of these, like, he's a weird person. All of these arguments that they would try and use to somebody that they don't want you to take him seriously. I think that now that he's out and that he's looking to endorse Trump, I think that you'll start to see those attacks ramp up because you'll start to see, oh, well, he was never a Democrat. He was never independent. He was just in this race to bolster Trump. He was just in this race to boost Donald Trump. I think that the American people hopefully are smart enough to see past that. They'll see that there is a genuine discontent, and the polling reflects this, with both Harris and Trump, and that RFK had offered a nice third way out of both of those parties.
Yeah, and in fact, to your point about the attacks on RFK as a result of his decision today, they've already begun with his partisan brain-dead family members who have also, 5 of them at least, have signed on to a statement today saying that, quote, "We believe in Harris and Walz. Our brother Bobby's decision to endorse Trump today is a betrayal of the values that our father and our family hold most dear. It is a sad ending to a sad story." His own family, Doug, now once again attacking him for daring to even challenge the party, in this case, the Democrat Party. And as you heard in RFK's statement, he actually offers, I think, a really, really talented and devastating indictment of how the so-called values of the Democratic Party are tyrannical. They don't actually represent what's supposed to be in their name, which is democracy.
Agreed. And I think it's very telling as well that those same family members, probably before Harris was coronated as the Democratic candidate, were probably in the background saying, how do we get rid of Harris? She's dead weight. I mean, if you look at the mainstream media, how they discussed Harris before she was basically given the nomination, it was she's terrible, she's polling worse than Biden is, she has all of this political baggage. How do we dump her for, say, a Josh Shapiro or a Gretchen Whitmer? And then all of a sudden, once it was sort of decided that she was going to be the candidate, everybody had to coalesce around her. So I do find it deeply ironic that the Kennedys are going to basically try and talk about how they are protecting democracy and that their brother is not. Their family member is not a representative of democracy. But look, I think that they are onto something when it comes to who this is going to benefit. I think if we look at the polling data, it's very clear that with RFK dropping out and endorsing Trump, this will benefit Trump. So there's some data that we have from a place called Harris X. It's a polling firm here locally in Washington, D.C. If there was a three-way race nationally, you would have Trump at 44%, Harris at 46%, and Kennedy at 9%. If you get rid of RFK, though, and he drops out, all of a sudden, Trump actually jumps higher than Harris does. She's at 51% versus 49% for Harris. So I think it's very clear why they are so threatened by RFK, because they do recognize that while he was taking vote share from both parties, it was pretty night and day that a lot of people who would more be in Trump's camp were going to RFK, and I think that they will probably return home now that he's out of the race and he has endorsed Trump.
And it wasn't like that when Biden was in the race, right? At that time, RFK was taking more from would-be Biden supporters than he was from Trump. Isn't that right?
That is correct. So you would see that Biden was so toxic to I think the average voter that people were basically saying, look, this guy maybe aligns a little bit more with the Democratic Party. He's a Kennedy. I'm going to vote for him instead of Biden. Now that all of a sudden Harris has basically gotten, weeks now of free press from the media, of free spawning attention, all of a sudden I think a lot of those people were now saying, oh, well, Trump, the one that I was going to say, oh, I'm going to go with RFK instead of Trump. That might change now. Like I said, the polling data does reflect that since RFK is going to drop out and he's going to endorse Trump, it looks like a lot of that voter share is going to go back to him. But I would assume that the media coverage is going to continue to inflate Kamala Harris's numbers.
Yeah, they're going to do everything they can to try and destroy RFK, even further than they already have attempted it. So you mentioned a number that struck me as pretty impressive a moment ago, which is that RFK in nationwide polling, if I heard you correctly, Doug Blair, that he has 9% support, according to, is it the Harris X survey?
This is a Harris X survey, correct, that indicates in a three-way race, RFK was at 9% nationally. And I mean, again, if you want to look at certain red states, I think Utah is a really great example of this because this is a very Republican state. It went for Trump very heavily. He was polling at 20%, right? I mean, there are people in places like Utah that are not super happy with the way that the two-party system has worked out for them. A lot of people have mentioned the uniparty. I think a lot of that is resonating with a lot of American voters. And so he was able to attract double digits worth of attention. I think that is very indicative of the world that we are right now, where both political parties have very serious problems with attracting and maintaining loyalty amongst their voter base, because they look at what's happening in Washington, they look at what their representatives of the presidency, what the people in charge are doing, and they say, you're not benefiting me. I still feel like I am being left behind. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I need somebody to listen to me.
Yeah, and RFK represented, in a lot of ways, a radical break from that system, especially when it came to issues of health and corruption. He's been, this really has been his focus for so long, so I could see why he would appeal as a third-party option. Will the fact that he is joining with Trump, clearly you're indicating that you think that this will help. How much help will it be to President Trump? Because really, it's going to that does send a signal, you would think, to the types of people who would support RFK rather than the other two mainstream candidates, that Donald Trump is taking seriously the issues that RFK has raised on the campaign trail.
Correct. Well, so look, we basically are sort of predicting here. Obviously, the art of polling is more about prediction. It's not about actually saying what is going to happen. But we've noticed in some more recent polling in July, about 10% of RFK's base seems like it's going to be very strongly swayed in one direction or another. If you add that up, it's about 2% of a particular state's vote or a particular national vote, which when you think about 2%, that's not a huge number, but look at the margins, right? Yes. Look at how 2020 went, how close it was. With a couple thousand votes, we could have been seeing a secondary Trump term. So if you're looking at these very, very thin margins, even that that little tiny push in one direction or another is enough to decide this election. So this could have a massive impact on who wins the presidency come November. And I think it's going to be very interesting, given that the attacks have already started against RFK as some sort of Trump surrogate, that's what the DNC thinks as well.
Also, outside of the issues that he's concerned about, just his ability to offer a very cogent indictment of the left. Man, talk about a useful thing on the campaign trail. So, yes, the media hasn't covered his independent candidacy, but if he becomes a spokesman on the trail for Donald Trump and he is savaging the authoritarian impulses of the Democrat Party, that really could have an impact on voters, whether it changes their votes or whether it leads some Democrat voters to say, you know what, I don't think I can actually support this party. I'm going to sit this one out.
Absolutely. And he mentioned during that, as you mentioned, scathing indictment of the Democratic Party that they're trying to tamp down on these third parties. And one of those things happening right now in Wisconsin, I wrote about this for the Blair broadcast, is that there is a Democratic operative that is suing the state's election board to make sure that the Green Party, Jill Stein, is not allowed to stand for president, that she will not be appearing on the ballot. The logic being some very contrived legalistic laws. But again, I think that he's very strongly condemning them for talking about how we are the party of democracy, right? Democrats are here to protect democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. It will die if Donald Trump is allowed to take office. And yet they are the ones, when given the opportunity, state by state, are attempting to get third parties off the ballot. They are attempting to say it is only Democrats or Republicans that are allowed to run. RFK doesn't get to talk. He doesn't get to do the interviews. Jill Stein cannot appear on the Wisconsin ballot. It's very simple if you look at who's actually attacking democracy. It's not the Republicans. It's very clearly the Democrats.
Corey just sent me this. Corey, is this is a memo that's come out from the Trump campaign and their pollster, Tony Fabrizio. I guess this just came out in the last few minutes. And it says confidential memorandum. It's not confidential anymore. I'm not reading it over the air. What RFK Jr.'s exit and endorsement means, it's dated today, and they say with the exit of RFK Jr. from the race and his endorsement of President Trump, there will undoubtedly be a great deal of speculation of what it means and who it will help. He said he's seen the Harris folks already trying to spin that it won't impact the race. He says actually the data speaks for itself. And then he shares a table from their most recent round of battleground state surveys. As you can clearly see, says Tony Fabrizio, again, this is the Trump campaign pollster, in every single state, RFK Jr.'s vote breaks for President Trump. And then he runs down state by state, these battleground states, how much current support RFK has there. Arizona, 5%, Georgia, 3%, Michigan, 4%, and North Carolina, 3%, Nevada, 4%, Pennsylvania, 4%, Wisconsin, 4%. And says all of this is adding up to good news for Donald Trump today heading into this weekend, Doug Blair.
Agreed. And I think that Fabrizio is absolutely correct to note that. And like I said, even though those numbers might not seem massive, 2%, 3%, 4%, those are still numbers that are going to impact these elections. When the political environment is as, let's say, fraught as it is right now, and people basically are very hard to move, it's almost about pulling those tiny little bits of numbers that'll get you across the finish line. So whether that is, like you mentioned earlier, Vince, getting Democrats to stay home, or whether that's pulling a couple of thousand independents towards the Trump camp, Trump must be celebrating and Harris must be fuming right now based on this information.
Fabrizio ends by pointing out the following. He says the net vote gained in a state like Arizona based on just the 2020 turnout model would be over 41,000 votes. That's nearly 4 times Biden's winning margin in Arizona. Or in Georgia, the net gain from today's news would be over 19,000 votes. That's nearly twice Biden's margin there. So this is, as you pointed out earlier in our conversation, Doug, in races that are separated by just thousands of votes, this is a massive news item in this campaign.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, expect to see attacks on Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. as a Trump surrogate, as somebody who was never actually in this to carve a third path out. Expect attacks like he's a threat to democracy, a lot of the things that we'll be seeing. Now, what I would really appreciate if people were paying attention to, though, is that, again, what is the angle that Democrats are going with? It is not to protect democracy. It is not to actually make your life better. It is not to enrich the lives of the American people. It is to maintain and to claim power. And that is all that it is.
Yeah, quite unfortunately. Doug Blair, thank you from Blair Broadcast Substack. Good to talk to you today.
All right. Thanks, Vince. See you around.
That's the great Doug Blair. And I think when he said Robert Francis Kennedy, I think that may have been the first time I realized that his middle name was Francis. You just assume that when it's F and a Kennedy, it's just Fitzgerald. You just think, oh, it must be Fitzgerald. Everyone's Fitzgerald Kennedy. No, stupid. Not everyone would have the same name in the middle. It's 3:52 now. WMAL traffic and weather. I don't know. I never really stared at his middle name. What is it? All right, a lot of breaking news this afternoon. Just in this last hour, RFK Jr. has suspended his campaign, now backing Donald Trump for president and removing his name from the ballot in the battleground states in an effort to stop the Democrats from maintaining their stranglehold on power. We'll keep discussing that development today and everything else we're learning. We could see RFK with Donald Trump today in Arizona, yet to be seen. But we do have Allie Bradley joining us in just a moment from News Nation. She had an interview yesterday with President Trump as there was a manhunt underway for a would-be assassin. She had a very unique experience as a reporter talking to him. We'll talk to her about that next.